When I first saw the post on Susan's Instagram, I thought it was a mistake. A photo of her holding up two dresses. The caption read, "Which one should I wear to Daniel and Claire's engagement party this weekend?" My heart slowed like it needed time to process what my eyes were seeing. Everyone was invited. Everyone except me. I sat there in my kitchen, the late afternoon sun catching on the old ceramic mug in my hands. I read the caption again, then a third time. Nothing changed. The words were still there. The bright little hashtags. The casual way she announced something that should have included me. I could feel something tight and cold blooming in my chest. If you've ever discovered you were the only one left out, you know that feeling. It's not just sadness, it's something sharper. I called my dad right away. Thomas answered on the third ring, his voice steady as always. I asked him why no one had told me, why I hadn't received an invitation. He sighed like my questions were an inconvenience. "It's just a small gathering, Evelyn. A little reunion. Nothing to get upset about." His words settled over me like frost. 100 people at a country club is not a small gathering. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, searching for any hint that he understood how this felt. But all I heard was the clink of his glass and the low murmur of the TV in the background. "It's not personal," he added. "But it was personal. Of course it was." After I hung up, I sat very still in my kitchen. The silence felt like something alive pressing against my chest. I thought about calling my mother, but I already knew how she would answer. She would say, "It was an oversight." She would tell me not to take it so personally. She always said that when things hurt me. I opened my laptop and checked my email again, even though I knew there was nothing waiting. No invitation, no explanation, not even a short note to say they were thinking of me. I scrolled through old messages from Daniel back when we used to talk every week. Back when he sent me photos of the house he bought of Claire smiling next to him. I thought we were close enough that I would always be included. I checked my voicemail hoping maybe I had missed something. All I found was a reminder from my dentist. It was a small thing, but it made the loneliness sharper. Sometimes it's not what people say, it's what they don't bother to say at all. I started remembering how it used to be. Daniel was 3 years younger than me, always following close behind. He used to call me his favorite person in the world. When our parents were too busy, I was the one who made sure he ate dinner. I was the one who checked his homework, who listened when he was scared. I thought about the summer I taught him to ride his bike. His skinny arms gripping the handlebars, his knees covered in bright cartoon bandages. He looked back at me with wide eyes, terrified to fall. But I never let go until he was ready. That day, when he finally rode on his own, he shouted, "You're the best sister ever." I believed we would always be that way. No matter how far I moved or how busy life became, I thought our bond was unbreakable. When we were kids, our house was always a little chaotic. My father buried himself in work. My mother filled her days with charity meetings and luncheons. Daniel and I learned early that we could only really count on each other. I used to make pancakes for us on Sunday mornings. We'd sit on the kitchen floor eating too much syrup while the rest of the house stayed quiet. On Friday nights, we'd watch old movies in the basement. He would fall asleep leaning against my shoulder, popcorn scattered around us. Even as we grew older, we kept our rituals. I thought they mattered as much to him as they did to me. When I moved to Colorado after college, I promised we'd stay close. I believed distance wouldn't change who we were. But sometimes you don't notice the space growing until it's too wide to cross. The first year I was in Colorado, we tried so hard to stay connected. We had weekly video calls, long messages about work, and little things that didn't matter to anyone else. I flew home for his graduation. He spent a month with me that summer, learning to snowboard, laughing when he fell over and over. I remember thinking nothing could pull us apart. But slowly, almost quietly, the calls became less frequent. Sometimes he wouldn't answer, sending me short texts hours later. Just an emoji, a single word. I told myself he was busy, that he was building his own life the way he should. But deep down, I missed him more than I wanted to admit. I missed feeling like someone always understood me without needing an explanation. Then came Claire. Daniel met her at some work conference. When he talked about her, his voice sounded proud and a little nervous. He said she was smart and ambitious. I wanted to like her, to feel like she could be part of the family we built between us. But the few times I met Claire, something felt off. She was polite, always smiling, but her eyes never really settled on mine. Whenever I shared stories about Daniel and me growing up, she would change the subject. It was subtle, but it left me feeling like my place in his life was something she'd rather ignore. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself it just took time for people to grow comfortable. But part of me already knew I was starting to fade into the background. After Daniel started dating Claire, things shifted in ways I couldn't name at first. He still called, but his voice sounded distracted. Sometimes he'd hang up after only a few minutes saying he had something else to do. The inside jokes we used to share fell flat. Messages that once came every day turned into a trickle, then almost nothing. I tried to bridge the distance. I invited him to visit Colorado again. He always said maybe someday, but someday never came. I watched him build this new life where I no longer seemed to fit. Even then, I never imagined I would be shut out completely. I never thought I'd look at a photo online and realize everyone else had been chosen, and I had been left behind. It was a Tuesday evening in March when everything became undeniable. I had come home from work tired but content, ready to lose myself in a silly reality show. Scrolling through Instagram was just a habit, something to pass the time. Then Susan's post stopped me cold. 2 dresses. Her bright caption about Daniel and Claire's engagement party. That was when the knot in my stomach tightened into something heavier. I checked my email again, feeling almost foolish for hoping. Nothing. I looked at my calendar, counting how many days I had left to pretend this was just a mistake. Not many. The party was happening in less than a week, and I was clearly never meant to be part of it. I sat there, the TV forgotten, feeling the quiet start to fill every corner of my mind. I finally called my mother, hoping she would have an explanation that made sense. Margaret answered with that bright, careful voice she used when she didn't want to face something. "Oh, Evelyn, how are you, sweetheart? How's the weather in Colorado?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my tone calm. "Mom, did my invitation get lost? Susan posted about the engagement party." There was a pause, then a thin, nervous laugh. "Well, it all came together so quickly. Claire's parents wanted something before her grandmother's surgery. That doesn't explain why I wasn't invited," I said quietly. Another pause. "I thought Daniel had called you about it," she said, voice rising just a little. I closed my eyes, pressing my hand to my forehead. In that moment, I understood. No one had simply forgotten me. They had chosen not to include me. After I hung up with my mother, I tried to tell myself it wasn't personal, but the ache in my chest said otherwise. I called my father again, needing to hear something honest. Thomas had never been one for soft words. "Dad, what's really going on with this party?" I asked. He sighed the way he did when he wanted the conversation to end. "It's just a gathering, a chance for the families to meet. Nothing you need to worry about." "But I'm family," I whispered, feeling my throat tighten. "Evelyn, it's not worth flying across the country for. Focus on your work." I waited for him to say more, to reassure me, to sound like he cared, but the line went quiet, only the faint hum of his breathing. When he finally said goodbye, I felt like something in me had quietly broken. I set my phone down and stared at the wall for a long time. My hands felt cold even though the heat was running. I opened Instagram again, searching for more proof that this wasn't just in my head. Susan had already posted another update about her manicure for the party. Linda had shared a photo of the invitation formal script, gold edges, over 100 guests expected. I felt something twist deep in my chest. A part of me still wanted to believe this was an accident, but there it was, in perfect calligraphy, everyone's names but mine. I clicked on Claire's profile. There was a private event page I couldn't access. It felt like standing outside a locked door, hearing laughter on the other side. I closed my laptop slowly. The message was clear. I was not welcome. I thought about calling Daniel one more time, but I already knew he wouldn't pick up. Lately, all my calls went straight to voicemail. Still, I pressed his name on my screen and waited as it rang. No answer. I left a message trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, I saw the posts about the party. Just call me back when you can." I set the phone down and watched the seconds pass. Nothing. Hours later, a text appeared. "Super busy with work and wedding stuff. Talk later." That was it. No explanation, no apology. I read his words over and over, hoping they would soften if I looked at them long enough. But they stayed sharp like a small blade turning inside me. By the end of that night, I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't about space or timing. They had chosen to leave me out. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories flickering across my mind. The day Daniel learned to ride his bike, the night he hid in my room during a thunderstorm, how he hugged me before I left for Colorado, promising nothing would change, but everything had. I thought about canceling my plans for the weekend, just staying home to feel sorry for myself. Then Marianne's words echoed in my head. Living well is the best revenge. Maybe she was right. If they didn't want me there, I could still choose not to disappear. The next morning, I packed for the ski trip I had almost canceled. My hands were steady as I folded thermal layers and tucked them into my suitcase. When I reached for my purple ski jacket, I hesitated. Daniel had given it to me 2 years ago, saved up for months to buy the best one he could afford. I held it against my chest, breathing in the faint scent of cedar from the closet. Part of me wanted to leave it behind, but another part refused to let this new hurt erase everything good we once had. So I packed it carefully, smoothing the sleeves flat. If I was going to reclaim any piece, it would be on my terms. I zipped the suitcase closed and told myself I still had a choice in how this story would go. On Friday morning, Rachel pulled up to my apartment with Mark already in the passenger seat. The sky was still pale, the mountains just a dark line on the horizon. I loaded my bag into the trunk and climbed in, feeling lighter than I had in days. As we drove out of Denver, the city gave way to open fields and rising peaks. Rachel sang along to old rock songs, her voice warm and a little off-key. Mark dozed against the window arms, folded over his chest. For a while, I let myself forget about the party, about Daniel and Claire. I watched the landscape slide by, snow gathering along the highway. Somewhere past Silverthorne, I realized I was almost happy to be exactly where I was. Almost. When we reached the lodge, the sun was high over the peaks. The air smelled like pine and cold, clean snow. Our condo was simple but welcoming, stone fireplace, old wooden beams, big windows facing the slopes. I set my bag in the corner bedroom and took a slow breath. This was mine. A weekend with people who wanted me there. We changed quickly, eager to get out into the bright afternoon. As I clicked into my skis, I felt a small thrill of freedom. Every turn down that mountain pulled me further away from the quiet hurt waiting back home. For a few hours, it almost felt like I was just another person having a good day, not someone whose family had decided she didn't belong. By late afternoon, my legs were tired, but I didn't want to stop. Rachel finally convinced me to take a break before I wore myself out. We found a small cafe halfway up the slope, the windows fogged from skiers coming in and out. I wrapped my hands around a mug of hot chocolate, letting the warmth soak into my fingers. Outside, families laughed and called to each other as they glided past. A brother and sister threw snow at each other near the lift. The sight pressed something deep in my chest. I tried to push it away, but the ache stayed. Rachel watched me quietly, then asked, "You okay?" I nodded, though the word felt hollow. "I will be," I whispered, hoping it would be true by the time we went home. That evening, we had dinner at a little steakhouse in town. The tables were close together, the air filled with voices and the smell of grilled meat. Rachel and Mark talked about work, about funny things their kids had done. I listened, grateful for the distraction. But every now and then my mind slipped back to Philadelphia. I wondered what Daniel was doing, if he even noticed I wasn't there, if Claire was telling people some story about why I hadn't come. I pictured the country club ballroom, all those guests in their polished clothes. The thought made my stomach twist. I set down my fork and closed my eyes. I told myself again that living well was still the best answer, but some part of me was tired of pretending it didn't hurt. The next morning, I woke early to a soft blue sky and fresh snow on the slopes. For a moment, I lay in bed feeling almost peaceful. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder that the engagement party was happening that day. I turned the screen face down, refusing to look at any messages. I got dressed, slowly pulling on my ski jacket, the one Daniel had given me. When I zipped it up, something inside me steadied. If he could forget what we meant to each other, I didn't have to. Rachel knocked on the door, her voice gentle. "You ready?" I nodded, meeting her eyes. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm ready to have a good day no matter what they're doing." By midday, the mountain was bright and crowded. Rachel suggested we take the highest lift to see the view from the summit. At the top, the world felt endless white peaks stretching in every direction. I let the cold wind rush against my face, trying to feel grateful instead of hurt. Rachel pulled out her phone. Let me take your picture. You look strong up here. I hesitated, then turned to face the mountains. When she handed the phone back, the photo surprised me. I looked happy, like I belonged somewhere. Without thinking too hard, I posted it to Instagram. Sometimes the family you choose is better than the one you're born into. I tucked the phone into my pocket, not expecting what would happen next. I didn't check my phone again for hours. We skied, run after run, until my legs were shaky. When we finally stopped for lunch, I pulled out my phone to a screen full of notifications. Dozens of messages. Missed calls from my parents, from Daniel, even from Linda. A text from Susan. What did you do? Everyone is talking about your post. My hands started to shake as I scrolled. Daniel had sent a single line. Seriously, on this day of all days, my heart thudded against my ribs. I hadn't meant for any of this. I just wanted to show that I was okay, that I could still find joy even if they didn't want me there. I opened another message, this one from my mother. Call me right now. You've upset everyone. A wave of heat rushed up my neck. I read her words again, feeling like a child caught doing something wrong. Then I noticed a voicemail from Daniel time-stamped during the party. I pressed play and listened to his voice tight with anger. What the hell, Evelyn? You knew we were celebrating today? You just had to make it about you. Claire's in tears. Dad is furious. I swallowed hard, pressing my palm to my forehead. Was it really so terrible to post a photo, to say out loud that being left out hurt me? I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, but the shame still came. I set the phone down on the table, my lunch forgotten. Across from me, Rachel watched carefully. You want to talk about it? She asked. I shook my head, but the words tumbled out anyway. They think I did it to ruin their day. Rachel frowned. You didn't. You were just living your life. I wanted to believe her, but my chest felt tight. In my mind, I could see that ballroom full of people whispering as my post spread from phone to phone. Claire crying, Daniel glaring. I felt like I was back in childhood again, being told my feelings were too much, too loud, too inconvenient. I took a shaky breath and whispered, I didn't want this. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then don't own their guilt, she said softly. But it was hard not to. Every notification felt like proof that I had broken something that could never be fixed. I scrolled through more messages hoping for understanding and finding only blame. Linda wrote, your timing was cruel. My father simply texted, we'll talk when you come to your senses. I thought about deleting the post, pretending it never happened, but something in me refused. I had spent too many years swallowing my truth to keep everyone else comfortable. Maybe it was time to stop apologizing for wanting to be seen. That night, I turned off my phone and left it face down on the dresser. I couldn't look at another message telling me how selfish I was. Instead, I sat by the fireplace with Rachel and Mark. We drank hot cider and played cards while the snow piled up outside. For a little while, the warmth of that room made me feel safe again. But when I lay in bed later, the doubts crept back in. I thought about Daniel's voice, sharp with disappointment. I thought about Claire's tears. A part of me still wondered if I had done something unforgivable, but another part whispered that maybe this was the price of telling the truth. In the morning, soft snow fell outside my window. I lay under the quilt, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ache in my chest settle deeper. I turned my phone back on, bracing myself. More messages waited. A text from Daniel. Too late for apologies, the damage is done. I read it twice, my throat tight. I wondered if he really believed I had meant to hurt him. I thought about all the years I'd spent protecting him, cheering for him, loving him without question. How easily that history had been erased by one photo and a sentence. I set the phone down, gently feeling something inside me go very still. Maybe this was who we were now. Rachel knocked on my door, her voice soft. Coffee's ready. I joined them in the kitchen, the smell of toast and fresh brew filling the space. No one mentioned the messages. For a moment, I was just Evelyn again, not the villain in someone else's story. When I looked out the window, the mountain was hidden behind falling snow. I thought about how much I had tried to keep peace in my family, how many times I had swallowed my hurt to make everyone else comfortable. I realized I was tired of pretending. If standing up for myself cost me their approval, maybe it was worth it. I took a slow sip of coffee and felt something like clarity. After breakfast, we packed up our things and loaded the car. The drive back to Denver was quiet. Snow turned to rain as we left the mountains behind. I watched the wet highway blur past my mind, drifting back over everything that had happened. I thought about calling Daniel one more time, trying to explain that my post hadn't been an attack, but I knew he wouldn't hear me. Not yet. I rested my head against the window, feeling the hum of the tires under me. Some part of me still hoped we could find our way back to each other, but I also knew I couldn't keep begging to be included. I deserved more than that. When I got home, the apartment felt too quiet. I set my suitcase by the door and stood there listening to the hush. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't pick it up. I needed space before I let their words back in. I unpacked slowly, folding my clothes into neat stacks. When I reached the purple ski jacket, I held it for a moment. I thought about the Christmas Daniel had given it to me. How proud he looked. How sure I was that nothing could ever come between us. I hung it in the closet, my hand resting on the sleeve. A part of me still loved my brother, but another part was finally ready to love myself more. The next day, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold. I thought about everything I wanted to say to Daniel, to my parents, to Claire. I wanted them to know I hadn't meant to ruin anything, that I only wanted to be seen. But I also knew I couldn't keep apologizing for existing. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a message to them, just words for myself. I wrote about all the years I'd spent trying to earn a place I already deserved. I wrote about the relief of finally telling the truth and the quiet strength that came after. When I finished, my chest felt lighter. Maybe this was how healing started. That afternoon, my phone rang. The screen showed my mother's name. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice even if it hurt. I answered and waited. "Evelyn," she began, her voice softer than I expected. "We'd like to come see you, your father and I." I closed my eyes, feeling a rush of something I couldn't name. Hope, fear, both. "Okay," I said quietly. "Maybe it's time we talked." In that small moment, I felt a door crack open, just enough to let in a little light. 3 days later, they arrived. I watched from my window as my parents got out of the rental car. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother clutched her purse like it was something to hold her steady. When I opened the door, no one spoke at first. We just stood there, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. Finally, my mother stepped forward and touched my arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it." I knotted my throat too tight for words. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something. A beginning I hadn't dared to hope for. 3 days later, they arrived. I watched from my window as my parents got out of the rental car. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother clutched her purse like it was something to hold her steady. When I opened the door, no one spoke at first. We just stood there, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. Finally, my mother stepped forward and touched my arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it." I knotted my throat too tight for words. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something. A beginning I hadn't dared to hope for. "I spent so long trying not to make waves," I said finally. "I thought if I was understanding enough, patient enough, it would be enough." My father looked at me, then really looked. And I saw regret in his eyes. "We failed you," he said simply. My mother reached for my hand. "I'm sorry you felt alone," she whispered. A tear slid down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. "I needed you to see me," I said, "to see how much it hurt to be left out." My voice shook, but I kept going. "I can't pretend it didn't happen, but I don't want to stay angry forever." In the quiet that followed, something shifted. A small piece of the hurt loosened its grip. That evening, after they left for their hotel, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt softer, somehow less heavy. I knew this wasn't the end of the story. There were still so many things to mend, so many conversations waiting, but for the first time, I believed we might find a way back to each other. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old photos of Daniel and me, birthdays, vacations, all the moments when we were just a brother and sister who belonged to each other. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had finally told the truth, and maybe that was enough to start again. The next morning, I woke to an email from Claire. For a moment, I considered deleting it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. Her message was long, careful, almost hesitant. She admitted she had felt threatened by how close Daniel and I once were, that she'd worried she could never measure up to our history. "I let my insecurity become something mean," she wrote. "I'm sorry for how I handled it. I read her words twice, my chest tight with something that felt like relief and sorrow mixed together. I didn't know if I could trust her yet, but I could see she was trying, and maybe that was a place to begin. I sat at the kitchen table reading Claire's email again. The apology didn't erase everything, but it softened something in me. For the first time, I saw her as more than the woman who took my place. She was just another person carrying her own fears and insecurities. Maybe we had both been protecting ourselves in the only ways we knew how. I closed my laptop and looked around my quiet home. I thought about the version of me who would have ignored her message out of pride. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wanted something better than resentment. I opened a blank reply and started typing. I kept my reply simple. I told Claire I appreciated her honesty, that I didn't want what happened to define everything that came after. I pressed send before I could overthink it. Then I sat back and let out a long breath. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders felt lighter. I didn't know if we'd ever be close, but maybe we could learn to be kind. And maybe that was enough for now. I stood by the window watching the morning light spill across the floor. It felt like a quiet promise that some endings could also be beginnings. A week later, Daniel called me. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it." I closed my eyes, feeling tears slide down my cheeks. "I know," I whispered. "We didn't fix everything in that call, but we started something honest." When I hung up, I felt a quiet strength settle in my chest. Sometimes the hardest thing is to stand up and tell your truth, but it's also the only way to find your way home again. If you've ever felt left out or invisible, I hope my story reminds you you deserve to be seen. Leave a comment if you've been there too. And if this touched you, please subscribe. You are not alone.